Well, hello, everyone. I'm Xochitl Pena. I'm a reporter with the Desert Sun, and I just want to say it's a pleasure to be here today, getting to do an interview with the Prince of Prince in front of everyone here today. So I thought maybe we should just get started. I'll ask you some questions, and you can answer them. So I heard that you purchased your first print when you were 14 years old. Is that correct?
Not quite.
Not quite. Oh.
So the first work I purchased on my own was a small study by a fabulous Portland-based artist named Louis Bunce, that for the few that are here from the Northwest, he was one of those people that, like many artists in most communities, is just one of the foundations of art in our communities. Wonderful teacher, wonderful artist, fabulous raconteur, reached out to everyone in the community, legendary. And if you think about it, well, the print collection I have now is the best of called the New York artists, the Lichtenstein, Warhol, Rauschenberg, Jasper Johns, all those people. The folks that are in the trenches in all our communities that make the difference are the local regional artists. And what I'm so, of the many things I feel blessed that my mother, Arlene Schnitzer, did for me, is created this sort of ecumenical approach where I think the artists we have in the Northwest are as good as anything nationally. But maybe they just weren't at the right place, the right time to have Gagosian or someone else, promote them and so forth. And not everyone is going to be in the Modern Museum of Art. But that doesn't mean that the artists that are in this community and in all the communities that you're all from, when many of you are not here, aren't fabulous artists too. So the first piece I bought was a small study. But interestingly enough, back to Prince, when my mother decided, after going to the Portland Art Museum Art School for 3 years, to open a contemporary Northwest art gallery, she rented the cheapest space in town in a building called the Newmarket Theater, which is one of the oldest buildings in Portland. It was $50 a month in rent. And she and the artists were there sheetrocking, painting, fixing up the small space that wasn't a lot bigger than this room. And I came down while they were working in the space, and she had her gloves on and painting. And there was this funny box, bunch of drawers, but you couldn't put shirts or sweaters in them. They were just sort of tiny little things. And so I pulled open this drawer, and I looked down, and there were these beautiful sort of pretty colored, like finger painting things. And I was looking down at one, and a fuchsia colored work, this big. And she came over my shoulder and she said, "Do you like that?" And I said, "I love it." She said, "Well, you can have it." So actually the first piece I ever asked for was a print by a wonderful artist named Stanley Hayter. Not that I knew or cared about how important he was. I just loved how it looked. So actually the first piece I ever sort of got was a print.
And where is that right now?
Well, in storage. Now the Louis Bunce, the little study I got, is in my dressing room, and I see it every morning, and I have every day since I was 14. And I paid, it was $75, and I got the family discount, so it was $60. I paid $5 a month, and as I said, if I missed a payment, I knew my mother knew how to foreclose coming into my bedroom to see the.
Wow. Now, so do you like being called the Prince of Prince? First of all, it's an interesting name. And exactly how many do you own, and where do you keep them all?
Well, this title was a new one that I think you created, or Rick did, and he obviously has a flair for promotion. But who knows? It maybe aggrandizes the working in the trenches, Jordan, in the art world. But it's cute, and if it brings a smile and gets attention to works on paper, then I'm all for that. So the story goes, to get to your answer, is that like many in our community in the Northwest, my mother was magical in, after she opened her gallery, helping us understand the importance of getting art into our homes and businesses and communities, hospitals and banks and so forth. Both because if we didn't support the local artists, they wouldn't be in our communities. So while I go around and have this major exhibition program all around the country, I always start off talking about the importance of supporting local artists. And whether it's the College of the Desert, the art fair in La Quinta, or whether it's the art fair in Palm Desert, or the fabulous galleries throughout this community, there's nothing better than getting to know and being supportive of the local artists and having their work in our homes and businesses. Now, after 25 years, she decided to close the Fountain Gallery of Art and do more wonderful philanthropic things. And I, like so many others, had really been inculcated to understand the importance of supporting our local art scene. So the first collection is Art of the Northwest. And I think if I'd lived in Los Angeles or if I'd lived in Dallas or wherever, I'd have art of that region. But I think we have wonderful, wonderful art in the Northwest, and especially the glass movement that's come along more recently. But when she closed the gallery, in hindsight, my mother was not home with fresh baked cookies and milk when I came home from school. I grew up with a working mother, and she'd fly out of that house before my father would, and she'd come back in at 6 at night, and we were lucky we had dinner on the table, and then, there'd be calls at night from artists that had all sorts of issues, and I mean, she was very devoted. So it's interesting, as a role model of a working mother, I had one. As a role model of I guess we would use that word, feminist and liberated woman, I had a mother that was that example for me. My father, luckily, started our real estate company in 1951. I'm honored to run that now. I started working when I was 14, and so I had a wonderful balance between my father building the real estate business and my mother building the art, introducing me and so many others to art. Now, so when she closed the gallery, looking back as an only child, I think it was a huge change for me. I mean, in many ways, I say like the gallery was like a sibling rival. Okay? My mother would be down there working at the same time, like I see with my two daughters when there's up and down, love, hate, back and forth. As an only child, I'd go to the openings, the artists would fawn all over me, I'd go play at the artist kids' houses. I mean, there were so many wonderful things about the gallery. Other hand, I mean, it was a different pattern than some others that were stay-at-home moms. So when she closed the gallery, I felt a bit adrift, not from my commitment to continuing to support local artists, but it was a change in my life. I was on the board of the Portland Art Museum, and I came up from a board meeting, and there was an exhibition of prints and drawings curated by a man named Jordan Gilkey, who was well known to all of us in the Northwest, but he was one of those men in the Army that was one of those Monuments Men. That movie came out last year, and it was wonderful to talk with him, the stories he had. He'd always be going off to Belgium, France, whatever, and coming back with another lapel medal for the wonderful things he did after the war of helping restore art to its rightful places. He had been dean of the of arts at Oregon State, and then he was a printmaker and printaholic. And when I was on the board of the Portland Art Museum, we voted to accept his 20,000 prints and create the Gilkey Print Center. And so he had curated a show of contemporary prints. And I came upstairs from this board meeting, and I went into the gallery, and there were these fabulous things by Hockney and Stella and Warhol and all these big artists. And I was intrigued and thought, this might be fun. I want to continue my commitment to local art of the region, but it might be fun to start collecting a few prints and multiples of the New York school. So I went down to the Ogden Gallery, Bob Cox, who had also helped co-curate that show, and I bought a small Frank Stella, I bought a Hockney from the Blue Guitar series, and I bought a Jim Dine, a heart crossed in a skull, and loved it. And yet while I was there leaving, I happened to see a Motherwell and a Frankenthaler and a few others. I went back the next week, I bought a few more and a few more. So before you ask me where I was putting them, the answer is, come on. I had a mother that was a gallerist. I'd been there in the gallery, and a million times someone had said, gee, Arlene, I love this work, but I don't have any wall space. Well, the passionate person she was and good merchant, she'd say, if you love the work, buy it. Put it under your bed, rotate it, but don't pass up something you love just because you don't have some wall space right now. So I'd already blown through wall space before I was out of college. So buying a few more prints and few more prints wasn't really the issue. But the next major step that led to this program today, where we've had over 90 exhibitions at 72 museums, came at my alma mater, University of Oregon. And I'd been on the board of the art museum at the university since I'd graduated, basically, and the then director in the early 90s, David Robertson, had heard that I had collected some prints. So he asked if he could have an exhibition. And he came up to Portland, and he went through a little binder that I kept. I'd cut out the images, I'd write down the edition number, how much it was, the artist, whatever, and he flipped through this binder. I only say that because back to your question about the 8,000 prints we have now, there's this fancy art data base that I have not a clue how to operate. Anyway, David Robertson borrowed 56 works, and I went down to Eugene several months later, and I saw this exhibition of works, a few of which I'd had up in the house. There's a William Wegman gallery here, and I'd had a William Wegman a dog on a purple chair, and a Robert Kennedy from Signs, a Rauschenberg. Anyway, there were a few from the house, most of them been in storage, and it was so exciting to see this work up on walls much larger than I had, and the way the curator, Larry Fong, had put the work together. And when I walked in, it was magical. And I think, like many of you that may have works by some of these fabulous artists in all the galleries here at the art fair, you know, when you have art around you, you develop a very personal, intimate relationship with that work. I think the analogy is when we go to a sports game, you'll be yelling at a football player, basketball player, tennis player, you know, go, and suddenly you feel like you have this intimate relationship and yet you've never met them. When you're lucky enough to have art amidst your homes and offices, you develop an interesting relationship with that work. It becomes part of your life, part of your family. So when I saw this work up, it was like walking into a room of friends, even though I'd never met Jim Dine, Hockney, all those people. And I thought this didn't get any better. And I'll finish up here with the transformational moment came when people came in. And just like when you walk around here and you look at everyone and they're smiling, frowning, gawking, all the things we do, and we're exposed to fabulous art like we have right next door here. And the real moment came when a man came in with his 8-year-old son. And the young man was looking at a Robert Longo image called Eric. And Robert Longo did a series where he took his models and he put them into a room like this, and he got a tennis ball machine and he turned it on. The models all were moving around trying to avoid the tennis balls. Now, if he'd said to his models, hey, I want you to act really, you know, sort of like you're dancing or twisting or whatever, it would have felt like if I'd asked you to stand up right now in front of everybody, you'd feel very contrived, right? But when he got them all up with a tennis ball machine, like you practice on Herald Tennis Club, you know, think as clever as can be. So the tennis balls were shooting at these people, and he's got all these images, and he took photographs of those people for this series, and then he made this series. Now, for me, when I see those works, what I see is that fine line between absolute ecstasy when everything is so perfect, like the sunset last night, and you're feeling so happy, and you know, or when you suddenly smash your toe into something and you're agonizing, my God, and you're just consumed with pain. That's what I see in that work. So this man and his son were sitting in front of this work, and I scooted down to the young man, and I said, hey, what do you think's going on there? Do you think that man is dancing and rocking out, or twisting in pain and about to collapse? Because that's what I see. Now you could hear the wheels turning in his mind, the young boy, and he said, I think he's dancing. To which I said, as any of you would, I think you're right. Because whatever he saw was right for him. And if he'd said, I think he's thinking about what he's going to have for dinner, I would have said, I think you're right. So to conclude on this 12-minute answer, the light went off, and I thought, wouldn't it be nice if I were to assemble a preeminent collection of works on paper because they're more accessible, and have a program where the work would be loaned for free to university and regional art museums. And that's the path I've been on the last 25 years.
Well, thank you for that. Now, you kind of touched on this a little bit. what I wanted to ask you next was, so is there a strategy in picking out your collection? How do you decide what and what not to purchase? And your collection is primarily contemporary, right? And so why contemporary art versus other kinds?
Okay, let's work backwards with that second question. First, so often when I have these exhibitions, people will come up and they'll say, gee, that Ellsworth Kelly. Ugh, anyone can sort of do that. Ugh. They'll look at Frank Stella. Ugh. And they'll say, why can't they do nice landscapes? Why can't we have a nice, pretty thing like a Matisse or Renoir or a portrait like John Singer Sargent instead of these Chuck Close things? And I'll say, well, first of all, most all these artists were in art school and probably could do work that looked like all of those, right? But I said, think about this. When those artists were doing their work, they were contemporary artists. Artists at any period in history. When they were doing the Sphinx in Egypt, they were contemporary artists. Artists that do work when they're living are contemporary artists. Second thing is about artists is, it's tough to be an artist. You've got to have some passion inside you that's burning to come out, and you've got to do it in a way that's different. Because if Melissa Morgan had an exhibition at her great gallery of Renoir knockoffs, that might be sort of interesting to see, what knockoffs get and how you, whatever, okay? But we've already had a Renoir, right? So if you look at Andy Moses, one of her great artists, I got some last night. I mean, every artist to get on the walls of a respected gallery in a museum has to have the passion to do something and to do it in a way that's not been done. So it's tough to be an artist. But all the work that's being done is contemporary art. Okay? And the second thing is why contemporary art for me and for any of us is because if we think back to the Sphinx, back to Renoir, back to Van Gogh, back to Michelangelo, pick anyone you want. Artists are always chroniclers of our time. They're always presenting to us the issues and themes of society, of the world, of what's going on. And that's their job. If you look at Andy Warhol, that's so huge right now. Okay? I mean, what he's doing was pushing the envelope thematically with one iconic theme and image after another. You look at the artists today, okay? That's what they do. They speak to us about issues of our time, our generation, our place. So I like contemporary art because it speaks to me of my experiences in my time.
And I'm sure you probably get asked this as well, but why prints versus paintings?
Well, I'm often asked again, someone will say, well, why don't you collect originals? Now, obviously, this audience is too sophisticated, but I'll say, well, these are all original, limited edition prints. And someone does a copper plate, a stone, a wood block, whatever technique they'll use, and they do their edition, and then they ruin that plate, so no more are made, and they're all limited, and they're signed, and so forth. So these are all originals. But if you're asking me why I don't buy Lichtenstein paintings or Warhol paintings, what I'll say is, well, first of all, even if I had the money, which I don't, to buy those works today, that's already been done. And so we have some of the most amazing collections. That Eli Brogue collection, the late Don Fisher collection, Mr. Meyerhoff, that's all going to the National Gallery, where he did 5 artists, Jasper Johns, Ellsworth Kelly, Rauschenberg, Stella, Ellsworth Kelly. I mean, Ovid, Saatchi. We have some people that sort of got there when those things were reasonably priced, let alone the people that are spending, those last 2 Warhols sold at Christie's for $61 and $83 million. I mean, I think that's a whole other topic. But the point is, in terms of collecting works like that, it'd be fascinating if we could bring Donald Fisher back and have him and Eli Broad here, and they could have a discussion of the 4 or 5 major Liechtensteins they each own, who has the best ones. That'd be a fascinating discussion, right? But the fact is, those big collections are amazing, and they're generally all being shared with the public, but that's been done. The difference is, and certainly I'm not inferring I'm in competition with those mega collectors. I'm more in awe of them and appreciative of what they've done. But the difference is that by buying the works on paper, the prints, I've been able to collect an enormous amount of them. So if the Palm Springs Art Museum called the Fisher Estate and said, could we borrow 4 Liechtenstein paintings, on top of the fact that'd probably be $200 million worth of art to insure, there'd probably be a fair amount of strings attached to doing that. Whereas if they called up like with the Liechtenstein show we had and they said, you know, can we borrow the prints? I said, sure, I've got some early work from 1951, 52, all 280 of his 450 things all the way through the last print he did, the Tel Aviv print he did as a benefit print in 1996. And for me, not having an art history degree, and like many people, it's wonderful to be able to do these retrospective shows with an enormous amount of an artist's work where you can really see the way they've progressed over time and get into their mind. The other thing by having so much work is there's not a political theme that can't be drawn upon. If you wanted to look at, if we look at the last 30 years of the African-American black artists, the best ones we've got, I mean, the Lorna Simpson and Kara Walker show that's traveling right now, and Ellen Gallagher, and some brilliant people. And we looked at some of the Hispanic artists, for instance, Chagoya and Almaraz and others. Would there be any themes if we put those all up to see about that experience in America that we might see visually that we might not have thought about before? So a curator can come to this collection and, I mean, pick any theme they want, and those are exciting things, I think, for me and audiences to experience.
Now, I know that sometimes art can be intimidating for some people, you know, whether it's purchasing it or just going to a museum and looking at it. Now, what do you have to say, what advice or what do you have to say to people that have that mindset?
Well, this is an audience of people that love art. So you're already here. You're the choir. What is so frustrating is if I asked each one of you, which you all should be up here talking about the joy you get from art and what you collect, it'd be fascinating for me and all of us to hear from each other about each of you. But think about your neighborhood. Think about your relatives. Think about your friends. The majority of people out there still are intimidated about museums, galleries, let alone art fairs. Okay. They think it's some elitist thing for somebody else. And think about the joy that you get and the passion you all have for whatever you collect. Okay. So part of what I tried to do with this print collection is try to break down those barriers. Now with this print collection, we have 8,000 prints. We've had, as I said, 90 exhibitions at 72 museums. We generally have 4 exhibitions out at any one time. We loan all the work out for free, pay the shipping. We do brochures for free. We've started publishing catalog raisonnés. My wonderful friend Rick Axum, who's the contemporary curator at the Madison Museum, Contemporary Museum of Art, and he did the Ellsworth Kelly catalog raisonné with me. We're doing a Frank Stella catalog raisonné, and then we're going to do a Terry Winters after that. Part of what's fun about these exhibitions is I try to get this work out to less served communities. And then we also ask them, an example. I was having lunch at a social club in Portland about 3 years ago, and I saw Brian Faricio, the director of the Portland Art Museum, was doing a great job. And I went over to say hello, and he said, I think you should meet this young man, Toby Jurevix. I said, hello, Toby, what do you do? He said, I'm the contemporary curator at the Joslin Museum of Art in Omaha. Well, I've not been to Omaha, and I hadn't heard of that museum. And I said, great. And so Brian said, well, Toby, you should go see what Jordan does. So Toby came over to the museum, to my office a few blocks away, and we took him into a little office space we have where Catherine Malone, my collections manager, toils so hard on helping put these shows together. And he looked at all these binders and all the art, and he said, now, is this really true? We can pick whatever we want? Yes. And it's free? Yes. And you'll ship it? Yes. And you'll do a catalog too? Yes. And you'll consider giving us some money to get kids in or seniors in? Yes. So I think my director, Jack Becker, would like to talk to you. Great. So a week later, Jack Becker calls, and we'd already gone online and looked at the museum. Like many communities, there was this wonderful 1929 community cultural center building built that in the 60s, 50s, 60s, was given to an arts group. And then they hired 15 years ago Sir Norman Foster to do a fabulous addition. So this is a wonderful regional museum, beautiful, with a 50-foot glass walkway between the old and new building with two giant Chihuly sculptures, beautiful place. Anyway, Jack Becker comes out. He spends 2 days in our office going through all the binders while the work is all in a data system, and you can look at it that way. We also have binders where the curators can come in and visually flip through and see the stuff. So he picks out about 140 things. And he comes to me and says, here's what I want, is it okay? And I said, boy, this is great. I said, the only problem you'll have with me, you can get whatever you want, but you left out this one and this one and this one and this one. He says, well, maybe we have to do a second show, which they've now done. So they picked out a show, and he called it Under Pressure. Great name if you think about Prince. And I said to him, I've never been to Omaha, but as long as we're shipping it there, you must know through your associations other museums there. Could you please call and see if other museums want it? So he called back a few weeks later and said, how about the Wichita Museum? I said, that's great. He said, how about Salt Lake? I said, I've had a Warhol show there. That's great. He said, how about Missoula? I said, I've never been there. We had a show at Bozeman. Missoula's great. And then I went to Bellevue, and then the Jordan Schnitzer Museum of Art in Eugene. But as an example now, Laura Millen, the director of the Missoula Museum of Art, she came by a year later when it was getting ready for the exhibition going there. And I met her, and I said, tell me about your outreach program. And she said, we have a wonderful outreach program. We bring in all of the fifth graders from the public schools. I said, well, how big is Missoula? And she said, 250,000. I said, how many kids is that? She said, 1,200. I said, that's great. I said, but what about the other grades? She said, well, we don't have enough money. So I said, look, why don't you figure out with your docents as many grades in the grade schools as you can handle, and we'll fund that. And then I said, who else is around you? And she said, we have an Indian reservation. I said, I love Indian reservations. Do you know the tribal leaders? She said, yes, this is the Kootenai and Salish reservation. So I said, could you contact them? So she did, and called back and said they've got a couple of grade schools, they'd love to be there, and it's a little bit more money. So on that one, I called my mother. I said, hey, would you like to fund bringing the Native American kids in the museum? She said, yes. And again, we're talking about that was like 10,000 more. In these smaller communities, it's amazing how a little bit of money can go a long way. And in that case, when Jack Becker picked out the work for this exhibition, I was delighted that he also picked out two Native American artists that most of you would not know, Rick Bartow and Joe Fedderson, who we think are fabulous, but they're not known like Ellsworth Kelly, Jasper Johns, Frankenthaler, Motherwell, Chagoya, Yellen Gallagher, and so forth. So as long as we were then having the Native American kids come, and we had two Native American artists there, we then asked Joe Fedderson if he'd go over for a week, and we funded that, and we sent some more of Rick Bartow and Joe Fedderson's work. So in terms of what gets me all emotional is to think that those Native American kids would go see probably Warhols and Lichtensteins and Frankenthalers and Jasper Johns and Longos, and the list was on and on. But then they'd also see two of their own on the wall with all those other artists. And then they'd have a Joe Fedderson there. Now, we don't track what happens, but in terms of dreams and goals and opening horizons, who knows what that may do. Think about each of you and your first experience with some art. Maybe it was with your parents, maybe it was with a teacher at school, but whoever it was that opened your eyes. Or think about who else was instrumental in your life in terms of what you do for a living and where you live and your values. So in our little way, we had 14,000 people saw that show. Generally, my exhibitions have like 15 to 80,000, but in some of these small communities, that's a lot of people. So in terms of just feeling so good about being the, call it facilitator, between these amazing artists, okay, amazing museums and institutions, and then the public, it's just such an honor to be in this role.
Wow, that was awesome. Thank you. So obviously your lending program has had, great impact on a lot of these type of communities. What can we see for the future of, this lending program and where do you go from here?
Well, in terms of collecting the art, I'm not taking much risk in what I'm doing. I mean, I still want to get the collection up. We probably have 250 artists, so there are a number of them where I want a lot more work in depth. I mean, we have, I don't know, with 50, 80 artists where we could do just one man show of 100 or one woman show of 120 or 30 or 50 or 200 works, but there's a lot more work I still want to get. I say there's not risk to that because, I mean, buying some more Jasper Johns, it's an allocation of money and trying to figure out, what you can afford when. But I'd love to be doing emerging artists. So much fun. So I want to get to that. And in terms of the exhibition program, as we've gotten to be more nationally known by the Association of Curators or whatever they call that association you're in, Rick, and the museum directors, we're getting more requests now for more shows. And being in the real estate business, I love, just put me in a car in any community, let me drive around and I'm happy. It's so much fun. Like I'm going on March 4th to Savannah. I've never been to Savannah, to the Telfair Museum. The Jocelyn Art Museum did a second show called Warhol in Living Color, and it's now going to the Telfair Museum in Savannah, then it goes to Jacksonville and a few other places. I can't wait to go to Savannah. I've always wanted to go there. And one thing I'll say about these communities is, the art world is very sort of New York and LA a bit centric, coastal centric. And there are such wonderful communities like this one, but communities across the country with fabulous art patrons and fabulous museums and institutions. I would wish sometimes that the big institutions would reach out a little bit more in a brotherly and sisterly way and help a lot of the smaller institutions. But aside from that, I'm doing my best to get this world-class work to all these different places. So what's in the future is more exhibitions, more cities. There's always room to expand the outreach of more dollars to get more kids in, more seniors in, more symposiums. So I think we'll just be continuing on that path. We're publishing again more catalog raisonnés, and again honored to do that. And as I said, then I wouldn't mind at some point allocating a bit of money towards some more emerging artists and some other stuff too. Didn't do so bad last night here.
Great. Well, I think we might open it up to some questions, but I just wanted to, I found this quote from you, and I love it. You said, "For me, waking up each day without art around me would be like waking up without the sun." And you touched on that a little bit earlier, and I just love that, and it's just so telling. And would you mind, just kind of closing on that and just, share why you feel that way?
Well, as I said, from the time I was in early grade school, we were lucky to have art on our walls. So I can't quite remember what it was like to not have art there. I'm so lucky and blessed of what my mother and father did. And think about your homes, think about your lives. Suddenly you hit a button and extract all the art and culture in your lives, and think about it. I mean, think about that hole that would be in your hearts and your soul and your lives. So for me, as I said, everywhere I turn when I wake up, I glance at or walk by art in the home here, the home in Portland, whatever. And I guess I was going to save this for the end, but I'll say this now. If there were a wish that I had, it's that And I touched on it a few minutes ago. There are so many people next door to you, nieces, nephews, grandkids, that for whatever reasons have slipped through the crack and didn't get the kind of exposure to art or whatever. And sometimes it's tough getting young kids into a museum. But think about galleries. They're absolutely the best place to go. God, when you go in, it's so easy, doesn't cost you anything. You can ask any question. Gee, Melissa, from picking on you, why do you have this artist? What's going on there? I don't understand it. They love that. Okay? And it doesn't cost anything. Look what it costs to go to a movie. And if there's a way when you're taking your grandkids, your kids, your nieces, nephews, neighbors, just say, hey, we're just stopping for 10 minutes to this place. Come on in. If you can just start that little bit, that seed, that kernel, what a difference you will have made in some young people's lives. So thank you.